Hello, everybody, and welcome back to a brand new episode of the Benchwarmers Sports Talk Podcast. As always, it's Labi, and I'm joined by Jacob. Jacob, how you doing today?
Lavi, I'm very well today, and I'm excited for this episode of the podcast.
Yeah, so am I. You sent me a message earlier this week saying you had an idea for the podcast, but we're going to keep it a surprise. And with that, I'll just throw it right over to you to introduce what's going to be going on today.
All right, so Lavi, you've been a very excellent host for this podcast. We've been doing just about a year now, maybe a little more. Um, so I got a little game for you to show kind of my appreciation for you to kind of explain your sports knowledge. So I got a game called what you can call it agree, disagree, over, under, whatever you want to call it. Basically, I'm just going to ask you a bunch of sports questions, and I want you to say whether you agree with what the question or the statement is, or disagree with what the statement is, or if you believe that the odds are high that it'll happen, or if they're low that they'll happen. And I just want you to explain why you think that'll happen. Cool? Simple?
Yeah, that sounds great. I'm ready. Let's do
All
the
right.
first one.
So first, because I know you're a Pens fan, so my first statement is Tristan Jarry has a bounce back year.
Ooh, there's so many ways to judge this because bounce back in what sense? Because I thought he had a decent regular season.
Well, we all know getting into the playoffs is it's easy to get into the playoffs. It's performing in the playoffs, which you and I both know he did not do very well.
Absolutely. So that's the point is if Tristan Jarry has an identical regular season to what his previous regular season was, I'm satisfied because it's good enough starting goaltending to, like you said, have the Penguins make the playoffs. My concern is with his playoff performance. My concern is actually that his playoff performance and then the way the fan base has reacted to it might have hurt his confidence where it will make his regular season performances worse this coming season. And, well, I guess the easiest way to answer this question is, as a Penguins fan, was I hoping that they would make a change in net? And, I mean, the answer is yes, especially with the way Marc-Andre Fleury's situation unfolded. Obviously, he'll be in Chicago now. I was hoping there was an opportunity for us to try to get him. So to answer your question of do I think Tristan Jarry will have a bounce-back year, I'm going to say no because I think what we've seen with Tristan Jarry is what we'll get with Tristan Jarry. I think that he is a good goalie when he wants to be, but I think that if anything, he might get worse because of the public's perception, like how basically how the Penguins fan base has treated him. I'm just trying to pull up his statistics. So last year, during the regular season, he had a .909 save percentage and a .275 goals against average. Nothing spectacular, but it gets the job done. He won 25 of the 38 games that he started, which are solid numbers. And then in the playoffs, his save percentage was down to .888. His goals against average was .318, which is not great. And those are just his general stats. So the reality is do I think Tristan Jarry can play .909 and save percentage .275 goals against average? Yeah, that's if I can get that, I'll be happy with him. But I think that's probably around his ceiling.
I think that's an excellent point, and it really goes to show. Especially look at the Leaf situation with Jack Campbell. He knows back up to starter, and one performed, and neither of them were able to get past the first round in the playoffs. Which leads me to my next question or a statement: the Leafs will make it past the first round this season.
So sorry, Leafs fans, to disappoint you, but I'm leaning no. And there are a couple of reasons why I lean no. Number one is recent history. Have the Leafs changed their roster enough based on the roster that lost in the first round in the last 5 seasons? And the answer is The answer is I don't think they've addressed changes. And the reason is they can't, because unless you blow up the core, which I think everyone agrees is a very difficult thing for them to do, and if they choose that, it's going to be a chaotic day in Leafs Nation. And so the second point then is, well, who are they facing? And we got to remember that we're going back to the normal divisions. And Tampa Bay, sure, they lost talent, but they're as good as they've ever been. They're still a very talented team. Definitely, I'd say Tampa Bay is still probably the best team in the league on paper, maybe number 2 behind Colorado. But certainly in the East, Tampa Bay is the best team on paper. I think Boston on paper matches up really well with Toronto, and I don't need to get into what Boston versus Toronto in the playoffs means to Toronto. Obviously Boston, that's a good matchup on paper, but then also Boston seems to just always find a way to win against Toronto. And then people are forgetting that Florida is also in this division, and I think that Florida matches up really well against the Toronto Maple Leafs in. Obviously, goaltending is still a question mark, and that's maybe the one thing where if Florida can't find goaltending in a playoff series and the Leafs start scoring goals for fun, they can get it done. But then my other point is, in order for them to play Florida in the playoffs, they're going to have to probably finish in the top 2 in their division, and I don't see them having a better regular season than Tampa Bay or Boston. So I really do think that they'll have to play Tampa Bay or Boston in the first round. And so in order to bring back Leafs fans and maybe win their support back, I'm saying no because of how tough their division is, not because of the Toronto Maple Leafs being the Toronto Maple Leafs. Although they did lose to the Montreal Canadiens. Although that Montreal Canadiens team also made the finals, so it's really hard to compare. You know what I mean? But yeah, I think that if the Toronto Maple Leafs were in the West, I say no question they get out of the first round. I think if they were in the Metro, I'd say it's probably 50-50. But the fact that they're in the Atlantic, I think that they're going to have to face Boston or Tampa, and I don't see them being able to get that done.
Yeah, and we talk about how Tampa literally has not lost that much talent. No team has done this in the salary cap. Pittsburgh could have done it, but they didn't. They lost to Washington in the second round. Does Tampa go 3-peat?
No, it's too hard to do. And I don't want to discredit the Tampa Bay Lightning's back-to-back cups because I'm not going to be that, salty Penguins fan, your cups don't count because it was a shortened season. They definitely do count. What I will say, though, is that obviously if you play a shorter season, there's less of the tiredness and the drain of having to play so much hockey. And so once again, not using this as an excuse, but what I'm saying is now that Tampa Bay are going to have to go into a full 82 game season and full playoff swing, they're going to have to deal with that for really the first time. Also, I think that they've gotten moved into a tougher division now that we're back to the normal divisions. As much as I said, I don't think Toronto can beat Tampa in a playoff series. I think that for Tampa to just get to the finals, they'll have to go through 2 of Toronto, Boston, or Florida, and then a tough team out of the Metro, whether that's Pittsburgh, Washington, the Rangers, the Islanders. I'm missing a team in that list, the Hurricanes, and then to go to the finals against Vegas or Colorado. This is thinking way in advance. But my point is that's a lot of really talented teams that they're going to have to beat. And when the Penguins went back-to-back, and this is not being disrespectful, but the talent wasn't quite the same level. The Capitals were a damn good team, and they gave the Penguins a run for their money in those 2 years, and then eventually took them out in 2018. But really outside of that, the Penguins eased through their first-round matchup, 2016, 2017. Like the Islanders back then weren't quite the same team they are now. And then the Senators, to be fair, really pushed us. But that Senators team, I mean, I always give credit. That team was way more talented than people thought that they were. But they were still players who weren't quite at that level yet. Like Mark Stone still hadn't reached quite that elite level. So my point is that the Penguins didn't really have... the Penguins had a much easier path. And it was still very, very tough for them. Sidney Crosby, in that 2-year stretch, played, I think it was something crazy, like close to 200 games between the regular season, the playoffs, and then the World Cup of Hockey. Tampa's now going to have to start to deal with that. And then you have the extreme talent that they're going to have to face in the playoffs. I don't think it's going to be a 3-peat.
Yeah, and it's extremely hard, especially defending any championship. But kind of moving on, staying with the NHL though, the 2022 Olympics are next year, and my statement is the NHL players won't be allowed to play at the Olympics.
Oh, that's a tough one about whether they'll be allowed to play or not, because we know those Olympics are in Beijing, and we know that the NHL are really desperately trying to grow the game, particularly in China, because it's a huge market. So, what's the easiest way to grow the NHL in China? Let the best players in the NHL go and play in China at the Olympics. So, and that's why people think that this might happen, because the reason why the NHL doesn't, the owners don't want these players going to the Olympics is for greed reasons. What if my player gets injured, then he can't play for my team, and for money, because who's spending the money to send the players there and everything like that. The fact that it's in China kind of gets rid of that argument this time around, because it will make the NHL more money in the long run by investing in the Chinese market. So because of that, I'm optimistic that the athletes will be playing. But the Olympic qualifiers are currently going on right now. Shout out to Teddy Bluger captaining Latvia. When I say he's the Latvian Wayne Gretzky, I mean it. He's the captain of Team Latvia at the qualifiers. But the NHL and NHLPA encouraged NHLers not to represent their countries at the upcoming qualifiers. Now, some players, as I mentioned, Teddy Bluger, for example, ended up going to play for their country anyways. But the fact that the NHL and NHLPA said don't go has me worried. So, will there be NHLers at the Olympics? I'm still going to say yes. But if you had asked me a year ago, it would have been a 95% sure yes. And now that you're asking me now, I'm going to say it's like a 60% sure yes. But I'm still trying to stay cautiously optimistic that they will go.
Which would be, really fun to watch. Of course, we here at NHL love NHL. We love watching, players represent their country. I think it's a really good way to show off Canada's extreme dominance at hockey. I'm kind of jumping to baseball right here. Miguel Cabrera got his 500th home run today against the Blue Jays in their win, in their back-to-back win. Where do you think he ranks in, would you rank him top 50? I put him as top 100 player of all time. Do you agree with this or no?
First, just quickly wrapping up the hockey point, I
Sure.
think every single hockey fan, particularly every single Canadian, wants to see Connor McDavid and Sidney Crosby play on a team together. Let's make it happen at the Olympics. Yeah, Miguel Cabrera, 500th home run. Look, baseball has been around for so long that it's very hard to compare eras. And then obviously a catcher versus an infielder versus an outfielder versus a pitcher are all so different that it's very difficult to compare across positions. With that being said, I'm interested because the list can't be that big. There can't be that many players who have hit 500 home runs. So that is a big accomplishment. And so just off of that, you obviously have to, give him credit for that. And I'm sorry, you can tell he's the 20th player to hit 500 home runs. So there you go. Does that mean that he's a top 28 player of all time? Well, no, because there are pitchers, and then there are players who were great who didn't necessarily hit home runs, like, oh my God, why am I blanking on his name? Ichiro Suzuki, for example. Like, he's definitely a top 50 player of all time. He didn't hit home runs. He just got like 200 hits a year. So but my point is anytime when baseball's been around for over 100 years and there's only 28 people on a list and you're one of those 28 people, yeah, top 50, top 100, he's definitely the face of the Detroit Tigers for the last 20 years, especially now that I think Verlander's spent enough time away from Detroit that Cabrera's kind of become that guy because he's been there for so long. So yeah, I mean, like I said, top 50, top 100, I think that, that might vary based on who you ask, but when you're on that short of a list, it's a huge accomplishment, and I mean, he's going to be in the Baseball Hall of Fame, and, he deserves all that credit.
Good stuff by the Blue Jays and their fans and organization for giving credit to him and posting about him and saying how proud they are to get at 500 home runs. Obviously it's not an easy feature to do that, let alone hit any home run. It's incredibly hard. Sticking with the Blue Jays, they will not make the playoffs without another star pitcher. Now, this is a star pitcher, a Max Scherzer or someone like that.
Oh, I think there's two separate questions here. Um, if the Blue Jays get another star pitcher, can they make the playoffs? Yes. Can the Blue Jays find a way to acquire another star pitcher? Because let's be real, uh, players don't want to sign in Toronto. The fact that, like, not taking anything away from George Springer, he's a great player, and I mean we haven't been able to see a lot of him in Toronto because he's been dealing with some injuries. And then I guess you could say, well, how much of his performance in Houston was because of the cheating? Although it seems like he was just a very good player outside of the stealing sign scandal in Houston. But my point is George Springer isn't on the level of like a top 10 player in the league. But when he signed with Toronto, it got coverage not just in Toronto, but in the U.S., like it was a top 10 player in the league signing. Why? Because players of that caliber don't sign with Toronto. Even getting George Springer and Hyun-Jin Ryu were two huge splash signings that Toronto almost never does. If you look at the stars that the Blue Jays have had over the years, they're players who weren't big names when we acquired them. Jose Bautista, when we acquired him, was actually statistically one of the worst players in the history of the major leagues. Like, the Jose Bautista story is actually crazy. And then he came to Toronto, worked with the hitting coach, changed his swing, and then started cranking home runs like it was like second nature to him.
And then he had that famous home run in that seventh inning of that crazy game 5, I think it was.
Yeah, against the Texas Rangers.
Yeah.
So, anyways, back to the point. I think that the Blue Jays can make the playoffs with the current pitching roster that they have now. Why do I say that? Because they already might have a star or two on their pitching staff. They're just too young. Um, and Pearson is the one guy. Nate Pearson, I think his first name is the one guy who comes to mind. He's a stud prospect, and the Blue Jays are slowly improving on his development. So I think that if these young players, and we've seen, for example, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and Bo Bichette are having their breakout years right now in front of our eyes. If next year that can be Nate Pearson, or I think we have another pitcher, his name's Merriweather. Like, if one of these young pitchers can do that next season, then the Blue Jays are definitely making the playoffs. But I think this team's good enough to make the playoffs outside of acquiring a star pitcher, because we have a star pitcher in Hyun-Jin Ryu. Robbie Ray's having a phenomenal season, and we have this young talent coming through. I think if we can just put together a solid bullpen, I think the bullpen is the area that needs to be addressed right now by the Blue Jays. And I think if we can have a very solid bullpen, that will give us a couple of extra wins that might be important. The toughest thing with the Blue Jays is they're in a very tough division because the Yankees have a shit ton of money, the Red Sox have a shit ton of money, and the Tampa Bay Rays always find a way to put a good team on the field even though they don't have a lot of money. I think in another division, we'd be talking about the Blue Jays being in the hunt for winning their division. But as it stands, they're still in a fight for the wild card. Do I think they'll make the playoffs this year? No, I don't think they're quite there yet. If they acquire a star arm, can they make the playoffs next year? Absolutely. But I think they can do it without acquiring a star arm if we see the right development and if they can address some concerns that are in the bullpen.
Yeah, I agree. I think the bullpen's the biggest problem. What isn't a problem right now is Vladimir Guerrero Jr., which we've talked about. I believe he has 36, 37 home runs on the league in the year so far. He deserves AL MVP.
If you look at his stat line, it's a stat line that is worthy of AL MVP. Absolutely. He's not going to win the award. Why? Because there's a player who's pretty much matching what he's doing with the bat. He just also is an elite pitcher. And sorry, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., but unless you have an ERA of like 2.5 and 150 strikeouts this season as well, you're not going to win AL MVP because it's going to Shohei Ohtani. But that's no disrespect to Guerrero. Like I said, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. at the age of 22, by the way. And baseball is a sport in which people at the age of 22 are hardly even in the majors, let alone in the MVP conversation. So like this is very rare what he's doing. And he should win all those other awards, the batting title, like the Silver Slugger award, I think is the one that it is, or he might even win the Hank Aaron. I'm not sure what the parameters are, whether that's just statistically based, or one of them I think is statistically based, one of them I think is voting based. I'm not sure, but he should win those awards. But the reality is Shohei Ohtani is pretty much matching him with the bat, and then he's also been one of the best pitchers in the league this year. And I mean, it's no disrespect to Vladdy, but it's literally taken a two-way player, the likes of which baseball hasn't seen in decades, to outperform the season that he's putting out there. So, if anything, Vladdy should take it as a sign of respect that it's literally taking, like, a transformative season, something that we haven't seen before in a long time, in order to beat him out for this award. But like I said, he's only 22. The MVP, if he keeps putting out seasons like this, the MVP award will be there. It's just not going to be this year.
It's crazy to think. You search up Shohei Ohtani and it says Major League Pitcher, and he has like 40 home runs, which is stupid to think of. I kind of want to transition quickly to soccer, which I know you're kind of a big fan of. And obviously there was a very massive signing recently, Messi going to PSG. Now, my statement is Messi will do better in PSG this year than he has in Barcelona in the past 3.
Okay, well, here's actually where we might. Well, I mean, I'm going to assume you're leaning towards yes.
I say yes because he has Neymar and Mbappe there, and I think that's going to really help him and take some pressure off his back.
Right. Okay. So you see, for that reason, I'm going to say no. But here's why. It depends on what you define as success. Because if you're defining team success, the answer is obviously yes. PSG should run away with the French league and PSG should win every single trophy available to France football clubs this season. Like, there's no excuse for them to not win every single trophy in France. The question mark is, can they win the Champions League? That's still yet to be determined. But the reality is Barcelona aren't going to win probably any trophies this year because they're behind their rivals. So from an area of team success, obviously it's going to be a huge step forward for Messi. He's going to win at least 2 trophies. He's probably going to win 3. He might even win all 4 major trophies that are available to PSG this year. But if you look at individual performance, what are you comparing? If you look at his actual play, I think Lionel Messi's play is always at like the top of the top of the top. So you can't really improve upon perfection. Like, not to be dramatic here, but like Lionel Messi has been the best player in the world, in my opinion. If you're a Ronaldo fan, he's been a top 2 player in the world his entire career, really. Whether you're a Messi fan or whether you're a Ronaldo fan, I think it's very fair to say that for the last 10 years at least, Messi and Ronaldo have been the 2 best players in the world, and it's not particularly close. So, is he going to play like a top 2 player in the world again this year? Yes. From a statistics perspective, because he's playing with these elite players like Neymar, I think he might see a decrease in his goals and assist tallies, just because he's not going to be the guy. Although, with that being said, PSG can probably win every single game like 6-0, so maybe he'll be getting those goals anyways. So I don't know, maybe the answer is yes, but I'm going to lean towards no, just because I think PSG are going to walk away with every other trophy where they're going to be prioritizing the Champions League, and it means that, not that Messi will take a day off, but it means that the team, might have some rest here and there and really try to ease their way through the season, because they don't need to win every game in the league title to win the league. They don't need to go 38-0, right? So they're not going to try to win every single game 8-0 just because they can. Because when it comes to the game that matters, which is these Champions League knockout stages, they have to be prepared to win those. So that's why I'm going to say no. But I think it's going to end up being better overall from a team success perspective. Because realistically, PSG has no excuse. They should be winning every single trophy this year.
Don't get me wrong, seeing PSG win every single game 8-0 without even having to try would be kind of disgusting, to be honest, and it would just show the dominance of them. Sticking with soccer, we just saw Italy win the World Cup, the Euros, and the World Cup is coming up next year. My statement is England will not win anything, a Euro or World Cup, with Southgate as the manager.
The answer is yes. They won't. But it's not because of Southgate. I think there are two separate questions here. The reality is, sure, did England invent the game of soccer? Is it the most popular sport in England? All of that is true, yes. But you also have to realize from a population perspective, England does not have the same population as some of these other big countries in Europe, countries in the world. So if you look at the talent pool that they have to pick from, it's actually a lot smaller than you think. So it's kind of like what's happening now in hockey, to use the comparison. And not saying that Canada doesn't still dominate hockey, because they do still win the vast majority of the time, but we're in a situation now where hockey is becoming more and more popular in other countries, particularly the United States. Now, the United States has 10 times the population of Canada, which means that in order for Canada to keep up, we have to have 10 times the registration rates of hockey. And for a long time, that was true, because hockey was really only ever played in the northern United States, like the Michigans and the Minnesotas. And so even though the U.S. has 10 times the population of Canada, Canada still had more kids playing hockey because everyone in Canada played hockey and not everyone in the U.S. played hockey. Well, do you know where Austin Matthews is from? He's from Arizona. Do you know where Jake Gensel is from? I really hope I'm not getting this wrong because he's on the Penguins, but I'm pretty sure he's from California.
Yeah, Patrick Kane is from Buffalo.
Patrick Kane's from it's more north, but you're right. It's not a traditional hockey, powerhouse of the likes of the Michigans and the Minnesotas.
Right.
But yeah, players are starting to come out of Texas and California and Arizona. Arizona State has one of the best hockey programs in the country right now, college hockey. So what's happening? Well, the U.S. now have more. The U.S. have more kids registered playing in hockey than Canada does. What's going to happen? There's going to be more chances for those kids to be elite level players. What's going to happen? What's going to happen is, unfortunately, 20 years from now, the U.S. is going to be way better than Canada at hockey just because they have more people. Why did the U.S. and China finish 1-2 at the Olympics this year? Is it because they're better than everyone else at sports? No. It's because the U.S. have 300 million people to pick from the best of the best. China's 1 billion people to pick from the best of the best. Canada only has 37 million. What are the odds that the best of the best is going to be from a pool of 37 million versus from a pool of 1 billion? So this is a long roundabout way of saying this has been England's problem with soccer, but because soccer is so much older and so much more of the world plays it, England have been having this problem already now for decades. So it's going to be, honestly, England are an underdog because of their population, because of the sample of players that they have to choose from. It's going to be very difficult for them to compete with the Italys and compete with the Brazils and compete with the Germanys. The fact that England, this golden generation, made it to a World Cup semifinal and a Euro final, as much as it's obviously devastating that they lost in those games, that's a huge accomplishment for the national team. It's the most successful period they've had since they won the World Cup in 1966, and I think that England fans need to be more realistic and accept the fact that this is a tremendous accomplishment. Now, to your point about oh my god, why am I blanking on the manager's name?
Southgate,
Thank you. To your point about Southgate, I don't think he's the right manager for the job. I honestly think that a better manager would have won the Euros with England against Italy in that game, and I thought that he did not make decisions to maximize his team's chances to win. So I already don't think England can win a major tournament, or it would be a huge upset if they do. And this is definitely the best chance that they have. They have a tremendously talented team. I don't think Southgate's the way to go. I really don't. He played way too defensive. And sure, did it work because they didn't concede a lot of goals during the tournament? Sure, but they weren't playing talented teams. Scotland, the Czech Republic, no disrespect to these countries, but you have a more talented team on paper. Even if you play an attacking style of play, there's no reason why Scotland should be scoring against you. And he was playing defensively. He's too defensive minded, especially with the talent that they have up top. There is no reason for you to have Sancho and Grealish and Rashford, and the list goes on and on, all on the bench. There is a way for you to get all these players on the pitch. Kane needs to be the main striker. You need to have Jack Grealish as the false nine, playing off of him as an attacking midfielder, and you need to have Sancho and Rashford on either side. And you need to have 4 attacking players minimum, because guess what? Even with those 4 attacking players, the likes of Sterling is still left stuck on the bench, and I'm probably missing other players off the top of my head that I can't think of, because England is just so front loaded. And I did not like the way that he handled that. He had 4 right backs in the squad. You don't need 4 right backs in the squad. You're never going to need to have more than 2 right backs. Why do you have 4? I don't think Southgate's the right guy going forward.
Yeah, I agree, and obviously putting like the young guns like Sancho out there to take the penalty kicks was the biggest mistake he made. Sticking with soccer, one final question. Team Canada's win at the Olympics is the most memorable Team Canada soccer moment.
Oh, that's a tough one. So the last thing I'll say about England
Sure.
with Southgate, just because it came to mind, the 2 center mids he was playing. And this is no disrespect, because I thought Declan Rice had a good tournament. Calvin Phillips had a phenomenal tournament. And obviously Jordan Henderson's there too. But they all play a similar style. They're all defensive midfielders. They can't create. And I think that the fact that they left a guy like James Ward-Prowse out of the squad entirely, I think is a travesty, and he should have been in the team. Or a similar player to James Ward-Prowse. They need someone who can pick up the ball in midfield and pick a 25, 30-yard pass. And I'm not saying that James Ward-Prowse is a phenomenal player. He's not. Surely, obviously you want the likes of a Tolisso on France, or a Pogba on France, or a Jorginho on Italy, who can, but the reality is, honestly, I think the best England has is James Ward-Prowse, and he wasn't even there as an option. Anyways, back to Team Canada on the soccer side.
Very, very passionate England fan, Lavi, aren't you?
I'm not. It just frustrates me when I see wasted or bad decision making.
It sucks because there's so quickly finish off with England. There's so much talent on this team, like you said, and the fact that they don't have arguably their best is really disappointing, and a terrible mistake by Southgate, who probably could have had a championship.
Yeah, well, and once again, it's just easier to make the hockey comparison because that's what we know, right? And so Team Canada hockey, like Canada's hockey team, there is so much talent to pick from, but just because you pick the most talented players doesn't necessarily mean that's the best team you're going to get. They pick the Team Canada hockey team based on so many factors, prior chemistry between players and that. But one of the biggest things they can do is, because you're essentially going to have 4 number 1 centers on your team, but one of them is going to actually have to play a 4th line role. So they're basically picking based on role. Which player can I pick who I know he's a first line center on his NHL team, but can he play the 3rd line center role for Canada? If he's not willing to do that, he can't play on this team. England needed to do that. They needed to pick not just the best players, but they needed to pick role. And box to box midfielder, creative midfielder is such an important role. It's literally one of the top. Like, you need a guy who can score goals, you need a guy who can stop goals, and you need a guy who can create goals. And they forgot about the guy who can create goals part of things, to the point where Harry Kane was dropped so deep that Harry Kane was playing that role. Anyways, it's just such a glaring oversight for Southgate to be like, we don't need a creative midfielder. And then the fact that despite that, they still made the finals. Like, Southgate was the guy who used the wrong formula but still got the right answer, like on a math test. Anyways, back to Canada's women's soccer team.
So I'll just repeat the questions just so you remember. This 2022 championship was Canada soccer's greatest moment.
So Canada soccer, men and women.
Yes.
Well, actually, I don't even know why I'm clarifying men or women. The men haven't won shit, so the fact that the women won a gold medal in the Olympics, this is already bigger than anything that the men have accomplished. Obviously, going to the World Cup, the men making it to the World Cup back in 1986 is a huge accomplishment. But the women actually winning the Olympic gold medal probably trumps just qualifying for a major tournament. So yeah, in terms of an actual team accomplishment, absolutely. What I will say though, I don't think this is a debatable question. Like, obviously, yes, it's the biggest thing that Canada soccer has to their name right now, men or women. What I will say is, in terms of iconic performance, if you asked me, pick the most iconic performance, I would pick Christine Sinclair 2012 semifinal against the United States. She scores a hat-trick in a 4-3 loss. Yeah, Canadian fans still haven't recovered from the way in which that game happened. That ref was terrible. And even despite the fact that 8 years later we've won a gold medal, still salty about 2012. But that is the single most dominant performance I've ever seen from a female soccer player. Like, she basically pulled off like a Lionel Messi, Cristiano Ronaldo type performance. She put Canada on her back, and she scored a hat-trick. And with the scenario of the game, like the game context around the 3 goals that she scored, it was such a memorable performance, and that's always in the back of my mind in terms of an individual performance in an individual game. But in terms of like an overall accomplishment from a team perspective, yeah, I don't think that Canada soccer, men's or women's, has done anything better than winning the gold medal.
Yeah, I think it was one of the greatest moments. At least if it's not the greatest moment, like you said, St. Clair hat trick against the United States, which was pretty salt inducing, to be honest with you. That was
If you haven't watched that game, if you're a soccer fan in general, whether you're Canadian, American, like any nationality, I recommend watching the full game. If you don't, just watch the highlights of that game, and like, you can immediately tell from Christine Sinclair's reaction. I think it was after the second goal she scored, maybe the third, maybe the second, I can't remember, but after either the second or the third goal, the just aggressive reaction from her celebration. She was pissed off, and you could tell she was pissed off, and she was going to take it out on the field, and she scored a hat-trick. Like, it's one of the greatest soccer games I've ever watched, men or women, that game. And I highly recommend anyone who hasn't watched it to watch at least the highlights, but I honestly recommend watching the full 90-minute game. Actually, went to extra time. Spoiler alert.
It sucks that the spoiler, America wins. It sucks that the officiating was so questionable that game. And if we talk about how bad officiating is, here's another question for you, or a statement. The officiating so far around all major league sports haven't actually been that bad this year, at least.
Yeah, I tend to agree on that. Look, the reality is, let's go through some of the major sports. Baseball, the only really big concern with baseball is like umpires messing up balls and strikes. There's a very simple fix. You go to robotic umpires, where every strike in the strike zone is a strike, everything outside of that is a ball. The reason why people don't want to turn to that is because people realize that, like, just because it's technically in the strike zone doesn't mean it's always a strike. Like, baseball's weird like that, where, like, even if it's in the zone, everyone agrees, like, no, that's kind of a ball because, like, it's off the, like, because it's, like, the outside corner type of shit. So, anyways, the thing with baseball is their biggest problem has a fix. It's just people are, reluctant to embrace it because of everything that entails. Basketball, they made major rule changes, which I agree with in the upcoming season. The whole, if a player pump fakes and then leans into the defender to draw a foul, that's now an offensive foul. Which I think is a great rule change. So I was going to say that's my one main criticism of basketball, because if I'm a attacking player, if I'm pulling up to shoot, all I have to do is pump fake, and if I'm close to the defender, I just have to bump into the defender. Like, how when you used to play street ball as a kid, or like you're just playing pickup with your friends, and you as the player shooting shoves your friend but then calls like for the foul, but you're doing it as a joke. Well, players in the NBA started doing that and actually drawing fouls, and they've changed that rule now, which I really agree with. So I think basketball will be a lot better going forward with avoiding that. I also like the transparency of the last 2 minutes. The league office, like the head referees, basically say whether the call was right or wrong. And well, obviously it sucks because they can't change the call after the fact. I do appreciate the transparency of saying, "Hey, look, we got this wrong." Which another league, NHL, I would love to see that, of like the NHL just admitting that their referees fuck up sometimes. Because I'm not expecting referees to be perfect. I'm expecting there to be transparency. Um, Honestly, I think that football officiating's like all right, given the fact that some of the rules are written so complicated that I don't know what to catch in the NFL because of like all the specific parameters around having control and finishing the process. But that's not the refs' fault. That's just the rule being stupid. So I think the refs more or less do a decent job. And then hockey officiating isn't bad. It's just in the playoffs when they do the whole let them play and we match penalties, but that's specific to playoff hockey, and that's basically because of like the hockey culture surrounding playoffs of like toughness and let them play. That has nothing to do with the actual rule book. So I don't know. I mean, they need to address that. But outside of that, I mean, during the regular season, like I can't get too mad about the officiating. I'm more mad about the what's considered a suspension and what's considered not a suspension. But that's outside of the referees. That's the Department of Player Safety, which is a whole separate department, and that needs to be fixed. But yeah, in terms of officiating, I mean, I don't think there are any crazy things right now. And then there's the whole VAR debate in soccer, which I think they went a bit too heavy into it, where they were taking everything to VAR. And if you were offside by like a whisker or like all these questionable penalties, and then I think they realized that was hurting the perception of VAR, especially in the Premier League, and they're sort of toning it back where now it's like VAR is to fix egregious mistakes and only to fix egregious mistakes. I think the way that VAR has been used in MLS ever since it's been appointed has been done really well. I thought VAR at the Euros was done really well. So yeah, I think VAR, it's still new, so they're still ironing out the kinks, but I think it's overall been a great addition to the game.
Yeah, I think VAR has changed a lot of the game, and I think it's changed it for the better. I agree. I don't think the officiating has been terrible. Like you said, the rules, some of the suspensions are out of the officials' way. I agree. There's been when Perry takes a stick right to the face from Marchessault, or guys are literally getting crunched into the board. You think that the refs would call something, but no, it's in the toughness. So there's not much you can do there. Speaking on injuries, we're going to go to our last segment here in the NFL, which the season coming up starting September 9th, I believe, with the Cowboys taking on the Bucks. So the most overrated team and overhated team versus the defending champs, in my opinion. Patrick Mahomes will get a season-ending injury in the first few weeks of the season.
Why would Patrick Mahomes get a season-ending
Because
injury?
here's my thinking behind it. We look at that game last year in the finals where he was playing with turf toe and he had a shoulder injury, and yeah, we know he got the turf toe fixed, but his D line his O-line, I guess, had problems. And all it takes, and you and I have seen this in many sports, all it takes is one hit. And I think his O-line won't be able to protect him as much this year, with teams especially starting to get more of a feel for Mahomes and how he plays and how he's a scrambler. But I just think that all it takes, I don't want to say he's a glass cannon, but I do think that he will get injured early on, and it could be season ending.
Well, I guess the one thing I'll say to that is they've actually talked to Patrick Mahomes, and he said that he's done too many backyard football plays. And
So
he was talking about
you think maybe he'll like just stick to the playbook and stop scrambling?
not that he'll stop scrambling, because obviously the thing that sets apart great players from like elite players is the ability to, especially at the quarterback position, make something out of nothing, right? So if Mahomes just decides that he's just going to stand in the pocket and just, only do that, he's not going to be effective. He's not going to be what's made him Patrick Mahomes. What he did admit, though, is especially in the Super Bowl, is these whole plays where he's like running 40 yards in his own backfield and then, throwing like a sidearm behind the back, no look, what all these passes that he does. He admitted that he's probably going to tone down on that, which I think is smart because, look, like you said, it just takes one hit, and it is a long season. So is scrambling that extra, 10 yards and is making that risky play to gain 10 yards worth it? Or do you just throw the ball out of bounds and live to play another down? So it's about finding the balance, because you do want sometimes to have that scrambling and have that creativity and make those plays, but you also don't want to put yourself at risk. So I think he's going to play smarter in the sense of he's only going to take risks when it makes sense to take risks. Yeah, I don't think their offensive line is as great as it's been the last couple of years, but I mean, look, obviously, unless there's some freak kind of incident, I think he should be all right. There are definitely other quarterbacks, Joe Burrow, for example. Honestly, I don't even know if Dak Prescott or Joe Burrow are going to be back in time to start the season.
Dak Prescott, despite not having played in preseason, is expected to start the first game of the season.
Because he's expected to start week 1, but I think that's because the Cowboys realize they're fucked without him, and I don't think Dak is 100% healthy. That was a brutal injury. And the fact that he hasn't played yet, I know you technically don't, preseason in the NFL, especially for, the best players, is, not even worth it. Preseason in the NFL is to figure out who's making the team, on those fringe positions. For example, Patrick Mahomes wouldn't need to play preseason. He could go into week 1, he'd be fine. But he's also not coming off of, severe broken leg surgery. I'd like to see Dak Prescott at least get some reps in practice, get some preseason play before saying, no, he's good to go in week 1. I think they're rushing him back, and I think they're rushing Joe Burrow back too. And those two actually Dallas's O-line, that's a lot weaker than it was back in 2017, 2018. I get what you mean with Mahomes, and obviously if Mahomes is trying to scramble and do all these crazy backyard plays, he's going to put himself at risk to get injured more so than a standard quarterback. There's a reason why Tom Brady is able to play at 43, and that's because he doesn't leave the pocket, right? But there are other quarterbacks that I'm a lot more concerned about, particularly Joe Burrow and Dak Prescott. Cincinnati needs to figure their shit out, man, because the more I see this organization, the more I see them just they're gonna ruin this kid's career. They're gonna and it's absolutely devastating to see happen, but it happens all the time in the NFL. We see these incompetent franchises not realize what they need to do. Oh, we have a franchise quarterback. Offensive line is overrated. No, protect your fucking star player, please. He's already broken his fucking leg once. How many injured does he need to get knocked out in his sophomore season as well for you to realize that maybe protecting your best fucking player is a good idea? But that's a whole nother issue. The Chiefs will be fine. Obviously, freak injuries happen all the time, and you never know. You even look at the preseason last year, Von Miller, just on a play in practice. Sometimes a freak incident occurs, and it's a season-ending injury. And that's what happened to Von Miller in practice last season. So I'm not going to sit here and say this guy's going to get injured, this guy's not going to get injured. But if I look at who do I think is more likely to get injured given their circumstances? I'm very worried for Joe Burrow and for Dak Prescott, and a lot less worried about Patrick Mahomes.
Which is reasonable. Dak and Burrows are getting rushed back into seasons where they shouldn't have, and we've seen that multiple times over. Rushing someone back is always not the greatest injury. Uh, Two or three more questions for you. The Buccaneers will repeat as Super Bowl champs this season.
Kind of similar to the Tampa Bay Lightning question answer. Do they have the talent to do so? Absolutely. Do I think they will? No, just because repeating in any sport, particularly in the NFL, like in the NFL, repeating is so tough. Because if you have a bad playoff game, not even a bad playoff game, if you have a bad playoff quarter, that's your season because it's a one-game playoff format. It's not like a best of 7 where if you show up in game 1 and lay an egg, okay, we have 3 more games before we're out. Doesn't work like that in the NFL. So because of that, I'm going to say no because it's so hard to repeat. And there are a lot of talented teams in the NFC. And, all it takes is not that, obviously, big meme, Green Bay Packers and losing in the NFC Championship game. But, all it takes is Aaron Rodgers to go God mode for a game, and you can't stop that, right? There are a lot of other really talented teams in the NFC that could figure their shit out and challenge them. The Rams, honestly, I think the Rams, if they can figure out the whole off the field shit, they have an elite defense. There's no denying that. And I think Matt Stafford's going to be a huge, huge upgrade at quarterback. Matt Stafford's one of the most underrated players in the league. And like I said, all it takes is one bad game from the Bucs, one great game from another team, and just like that, you're out of the playoffs. So, it's certainly possible. I definitely have them in the Super Bowl contending ranking, but just because of the one-game playoff format, I'm going to say no because it's a very, very hard thing to do, to repeat.
Well, speaking of teams that could go the distance, the Buffalo Bills will make the Super Bowl this year.
Oh, that's also so tough just because, well, first of all, the Chiefs are in their conference. So to make the Super Bowl, you probably have to go through Kansas City. You probably have to go through Baltimore. Pittsburgh's very good as usual. The Cleveland Browns have shown that, maybe they actually can put together a winning football team. So it's tough. What I will say is that their division is very much theirs. I think the Dolphins aren't as good as people think they are. I'm not saying they're a bad team, but I think a lot of people think that the Dolphins are some playoff lock, competing with the Bills for the division. And now watch this take go terribly wrong as the Dolphins win the division. But I think the Patriots are still in transition. The Jets are the Jets. And the Dolphins aren't as good as people think they are. I think that Buffalo wins their division very easily. It's just a matter of can they win those big playoff games. There's no reason why they can't, but I think home field advantage is going to be huge. I think that the way the Bills make the Super Bowl is they take advantage of their weak division and win 13 or 14 games and try to get the 1 seed in the AFC. Because the difference between playing the Chiefs at Arrowhead versus playing the Chiefs in Buffalo, especially now that fans are going to be back, that's huge. That's huge. And the only way I see Buffalo making the Super Bowl is if it's a January football game in the snow of Buffalo with the crazy Bills fans in that stadium up in Buffalo. And I can see that potentially being the reason why. So if Buffalo is able to put together it's a 17-game season now. If they can put together a 14-3 or 15-2, that just sounds so weird saying those records don't sound right. But if they can put together a 2 or 3 loss season, then let's say, and try to get the 1 seed, I think it's very possible. I think if they have to go into Kansas City or go into Baltimore and win a game on the road, I don't like their chances.
Yeah, we know how crazy Arrowhead can get, so we'll have to see. Um, Two more questions for you, then we'll wrap up this podcast. The 2020 Tokyo Olympics were the most forgettable Olympics in recent history.
I mean, I don't want to say. I'm gonna say no for personal reasons. But and then I'm looking at it from like a general society. I can see why the answer is yes. Obviously, the answer is no because I was able to watch the women's soccer team win a gold medal, and like that will always be a lasting memory for me. And so I'll always remember Tokyo 2020 because of that. If you look at it from a Canadian perspective, it's absolutely not a forgettable Olympics. It's literally the most successful Summer Olympics Canada's had in a non-boycotted games. Penny Oleksiak became the most decorated Olympian in Canadian history. Andre DeGrasse became the most decorated Canadian male in Olympic history. He's also now 6 for 6 in events he's competed in the Olympics and getting medals. And then you have, why am I blank? Damian Warner literally winning the decathlon gold, which makes him the greatest athlete in the world. The women's soccer team, which is like one of the most supported teams in Canada, one of the most well-liked teams in Canada, win gold. So from a Canada perspective, absolutely not forgettable. From a general societal global standpoint, I can see why. No fans. You look at the backdrop of like everything that's going on in the world with COVID and everything, I can see why it kind of dropped from the foreground of everything that's going on. Um, and then also because sports and well, because everything was canceled, everything that was supposed to happen in 2020, like the Olympics, like the Euros, like the Copa America, even like everything got pushed and compressed where 2 years worth of events all happened in one summer. So I can also see why it was forgettable in that sense because after, especially if you're a soccer fan, like if you watch the Euros and then watch the Copa America and then you're like, oh, now the Olympics are going on, like you kind of get drained. So I can see why from a global perspective the answer would be yes, but from a personal perspective and from a Canadian perspective the answer is obviously no, just because of all the headlines that have come out of the Olympics.
Yeah, exactly. There was, like we said earlier in some podcasts, it was some sports overload per se. And one final question for you. Having a team of average players is better than having a team with only two or three superstars.
It depends on the sport.
And it doesn't matter the sport. I think in every sport, it's okay to have one superstar, but I think one superstar is already enough for a team.
Ooh, I'm gonna disagree if it's every sport. I think it very much depends on the sport. Very much
Okay.
depends on the sport. Basketball. If I have an option of a team where every single player is above average, or I have like two or three elite level players and everyone else is average. It depends on the sport. Basketball, I want the team that has three elite players and everyone else is average because you can win a championship with that. That's actually the literal blueprint to building a championship basketball team. Forget everybody else. If you get two or three elite level players and then fill out the rest of your roster with whatever you can afford, that's the blueprint to winning a championship. It's how literally every single championship has been won in the last 15 years, probably outside of the Raptors in 2019 and outside of the Pistons in 2004. Hockey is the exact opposite. Hockey, I want the well-balanced team. You can ask Connor McDavid how being the best player in the world is working out for him when it comes to the playoffs. The answer, it's not. You can ask the Leafs, who have a basketball-built team in hockey with 4 or 5 elite level players and everyone else, how it's working out for them in the playoffs. It's not. Soccer is kind of a mix of both because obviously soccer, you're only as good as your weakest link. Because one player can lose the game for you in soccer. But if you have a player like Messi, he can drag you kicking and screaming very far, as he's shown his entire career. Now, he hasn't necessarily got them all the way, but like, and once again, I keep talking about this, but like, I genuinely think Messi dragging that Argentina team to the World Cup Finals in 2014 is one of the greatest single feat, like one of the greatest individual performances in a team sport that you'll see, like all time. Obviously, they didn't win it, but Messi dragged them kicking and screaming to the finals. So it's certainly possible for you to get very far. Although I still think having a well-balanced team, as I'm sure Germany in 2014 would tell you, not that they didn't have elite players, they did, but no one on Messi's level. Um, yeah, I think it's so dependent on the sport. Because, like, baseball, if my elite level player is a pitcher, well, if he throws a no-hitter, I'm going to certainly, like my chances of winning the game, because then all I need is a one run to win the game. But on the same time, talk to Jake DeGrom about run support, and he'll have a lot of stories to tell you. Speaking of, because you mentioned Miguel Cabrera, talk to Detroit Tigers Justin Verlander about run support, and he'll have a lot of stories to tell you about pitching 7 shutout innings, but then getting stuck with a no decision, or only giving up 1 run and getting stuck with a loss because your team doesn't know how to score. So, I think that the answer in almost every single circumstance is give me the balanced team instead. But I still think in basketball, I want the superstar loaded team instead, because in basketball it's just proven to work.
Fair enough, and I guess you're right. It does kind of depend on what the sport is. You're right. In hockey, McDavid gets nothing, but in basketball, if you don't have Blake Griffin, Kevin Durant, James Harden, or Kyrie Irving on a team, you're not going to win. And that's a good way to end it up, Lavi. You want to take us out? That was the agree or disagree section of the sports guide. I hope you enjoyed.
Yeah, I definitely did enjoy. That was a lot of fun. Yeah, I mean, obviously there are exceptions to the rule. Like I said, the '04 Pistons team. Although once again, that team, just like how the 2019 Raptors team gets disrespected and people don't recognize how good Kyle Lowry is and how good Pascal Siakam was that year, and like people disrespect that '04 Pistons team. That 2004 Pistons team had some damn good players on it. But because they didn't have a player who was top 5 in the league at the time, they were seen as being like an underdog team. But that team had some serious talent on it. So yeah, don't disrespect the Pistons. The last thing I want to say, just because I saw this stat and I did want to shout it out. So the Little League World Series is going on right now. For anyone who follows that. And there's the Little League World Series, I believe, you're like 12, these kids are like 12 years old.
Yeah, 12, 11, 12.
Yeah, something like that. So there's this kid for the South Dakota team. His name is Gavin Weir. So in his first Little League World Series game, he's a pitcher. So he pitched 5 2/3 innings. So for those of you who don't understand, 17 outs. He had 0 hits, 15 strikeouts. The guy's an absolute monster. He's thrown 572 pitches between the district, states, regionals, and Little League World Series. And over all of those 572 pitches, he's allowed 1 hit across districts, states, regionals, and the Little League World Series. 1 hit in their entire run. What?
That's ridiculous. Like, that is 11, 12 years old.
Yeah, so like this 12-year-old kid is so elite that he's given up 1 hit all season. All season.
Like, that's stupid. Like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, so that's why I wanted to shout it out, because that's genuine. Like, I still can't wrap my head around that. Like, that is one of the craziest statistics I've heard, like, all time. And so I did want to shout out Gavin Weir, 12-year-old kid from, what did I say he was from? South Dakota? South Dakota. I think he's like 11 or 12 years old. So, 10 years from now when he makes his MLB debut, you heard it here first.
Yep, Lavi, take us out, buddy. You heard it, Gavin Weir, buddy. We can't wait to see you in the MLB, boss.
Yeah, shout out Gavin Weir, and shout out the Little League World Series. It's actually super entertaining if you have nothing else to watch and you want to watch some pretty competitive baseball. Yeah, but with that, thank you. Well, thank you to Jacob for setting up the cool game that we were able to play today. I enjoyed it, and hopefully the listeners did as well. And thank you guys so much for listening to another episode of the Benchwarmers Sports Talk podcast. And we will be back with a brand new episode next week. But until then, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you then.